We are very close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers, but I still need your support. Please don't forget to take a second and subscribe to my channel. The snow had started falling just after dusk, soft at first, a light dusting that clung to the streetlights along Broadway before thickening into heavy, wet flakes that turned the city into a watercolor of white and amber. By 11:30 p.m., Christmas Eve had settled over Manhattan like a hush that the city rarely allowed itself. Taxis idling at red lights, steam rising from the grates, store windows still blinking with half-hearted holiday displays. The few pedestrians who remained on the streets walked quickly, heads bowed, the rhythm of their boots softened by slush. Union Square Station, usually crowded even at midnight, felt cavernous and strange that night, its tiled corridors echoing with the hollow sound of dripping water and the distant whine of an incoming train. Surveillance footage later showed her entering through the 14th Street entrance at exactly 11:41 p.m. 19-year-old NYU sophomore Rachel Mendez, majoring in literature, wearing a navy peacoat, dark jeans, and a bright blue wool scarf. She carried a canvas tote bag decorated with faded bookstore logos, her hair damp from the snow, her gloved hands clutching a MetroCard that she would scan 1 minute later at 11:42 p.m. The timestamp, burned into the turnstile's magnetic record, became the last verifiable trace of her existence. Witnesses were unreliable, as they often are in the city. One commuter thought he remembered a young woman matching her description standing near the downtown platform map. Another claimed to have seen her step onto the 6 train, third car from the front, as it pulled in at 11:43. But no one remembered her sitting down. No one remembered her standing when the train reached Brooklyn Bridge City Hall, its final stop 42 minutes later. When the car was emptied by MTA staff just after midnight, they found her scarf folded neatly on the seat nearest the door, the fabric still warm to the touch as if it had been held moments earlier. The initial report, filed at 2:17 a.m. by a transit supervisor, classified it as lost property. It wasn't until Christmas morning, when Rachel's parents in Yonkers called the NYPD to report that their daughter hadn't arrived for the family gathering she never missed, that the notation, "possible missing person," was added to the record. Detective Michael Navarro of the NYPD Missing Persons Unit caught the case during what was supposed to be an uneventful holiday shift. Navarro was 48, a veteran of subway investigations, the kind of detective who knew the smell of every underground platform: ozone, mold, rust, and loneliness. The file he received contained almost nothing: a name, an age, a MetroCard timestamp, and a scarf held in evidence, labeled with a case number written in black marker that bled slightly in the humidity of the precinct locker. Rachel's roommate, Jessica Hahn, reported that she'd left their East Village apartment around 10:45 p.m., saying she needed to drop off a Christmas gift for her boyfriend who worked the night shift at a midtown hotel. She'd been cheerful, even humming as she wrapped the small package, a book of poetry by Neruda, and a silver keychain engraved with initials. Jessica had assumed Rachel would catch the 6 train uptown, deliver the gift, and come back in time to catch their planned midnight mass at St. Mary's. When she didn't return by 1 a.m., Jessica called her pager, then her cell phone, which went straight to voicemail. The call logs later confirmed that Rachel's phone last connected to a cell tower near Union Square at 11:44 p.m., seconds after her MetroCard swipe. Navarro started his investigation the way all good detectives do, by walking. On December 25th, as the city slept off its holiday hangover, he descended the worn steps of Union Square Station, the same steps Rachel had taken. The air was sharp with the metallic scent of rail dust and melting snow. Christmas ads peeled from the walls, forgotten by commuters rushing to celebrate somewhere warmer. He stood on the platform where the 6 train had pulled in that night, picturing the scene from the grainy surveillance stills, Rachel glancing down the tunnel, adjusting her scarf, the gust of air as the train approached. He noted the cameras, 3 functional, 2 blinded by grime, and requested all available footage from 11:30 p.m. to midnight. The MTA's outdated recording system stored video on analog tapes rotated weekly, meaning the Christmas Eve footage would be erased by New Year's unless seized. Navarro's request, stamped urgent, reached the Transit Bureau just in time. What he watched over the following days would become the backbone of the mystery that haunted him for the next decade. The footage showed the 6 train arriving as scheduled, the third car door sliding open, passengers boarding and exiting in the indifferent choreography of city life. Rachel appeared briefly, her blue scarf distinct even in the monochrome frame. She stepped inside. The doors closed. The train pulled away. 42 minutes later, at Brooklyn Bridge City Hall, the same car emptied out. The camera on that platform caught every departing commuter, tired office workers, a couple arguing, a man carrying a plastic-wrapped Christmas tree. But Rachel never appeared. No one fitting her description exited. The scarf, later found folded on the seat, was visible in one frame, though only barely, a faint blur of blue fabric against gray plastic. Navarro paused the tape, replayed it dozens of times, studying the position of the scarf as the train jolted to a stop. It didn't flutter, didn't fall. It was already lying there, folded neatly, as if someone had placed it down while the train was still moving. The case grew colder by the day. Rachel's boyfriend, Eli Turner, a 21-year-old bellhop at the Roosevelt Hotel, was questioned repeatedly. He'd never received the gift she was bringing him. He claimed she'd called at 11:10 p.m. to say she was on her way, her voice light, unaffected. Phone records confirmed the call. He waited for 2 hours in the hotel lobby before assuming she'd changed her mind because of the weather. When Navarro pressed him about their relationship, Eli admitted they'd argued 2 days earlier about his jealousy, her long study hours, and a rumor she'd been seen having coffee with a teaching assistant. But he denied any involvement, and his time cards plus security footage placed him at work continuously through the night. Rachel's classmates described her as diligent, reserved, kind, the sort of student who collected vintage novels and wrote letters instead of emails. Her professors remembered her handwriting, precise, slanted, and her fascination with tragic disappearances in literature. As the days passed, the blizzard that had paralyzed the city on Christmas Eve melted into slush, washing away what little physical evidence might have existed above ground. Navarro's interviews with MTA staff turned up one anomaly. The conductor of the Downtown 6 that night, Thomas Avery, recalled a moment around Canal Street when the train's emergency intercom light flickered on for less than a second, too short for him to hear anything, but long enough for the panel to register activation. He'd logged it as a technical glitch. Navarro made note of it anyway. He visited the train yard where the car had been stored, crawling beneath its chassis with a flashlight, searching for any sign of tampering or forced entry. There was nothing. No blood, no fibers beyond the usual commuter debris, no damage to the doors or windows. Just the echo of unanswered questions. By New Year's Day, media interest had waned. The tabloids ran a brief story, college girl vanishes in subway mystery, before moving on to a Times Square brawl that made for better headlines. Rachel's parents, Luis and Carmen Mendez, arrived in Manhattan carrying photographs of their daughter printed at a pharmacy kiosk, standing outside the station in the cold, handing flyers to strangers who barely made eye contact. Carmen's hands shook as she taped posters to lampposts. Missing Rachel Mendez, age 19, last seen December 24th, Union Square Station. Luis refused to leave the city, sleeping in cheap motels and spending his days retracing Rachel's possible routes, counting steps, timing train schedules, talking to commuters who might have shared that fateful ride. Navarro's supervisors grew impatient. Missing persons over 48 hours old rarely ended well, and resources were scarce. But something about the precision of Rachel's disappearance, the locked system of the subway, the confined space, the total absence of struggle, gnawed at him. He requested access to maintenance logs for the 6th line between Union Square and Brooklyn Bridge, hoping for anomalies, emergency stops, door malfunctions, anything. On December 26th, a technician named Harold Gleason mentioned a peculiar report from that night. A track worker had logged an unauthorized power fluctuation between Astor Place and Bleecker Street around 11:55 p.m., roughly 12 minutes after Rachel boarded. The voltage drop lasted less than 30 seconds. Power dips weren't unusual in winter, but the timing aligned almost perfectly with the point where Rachel should have been between stations. Navarro drove to the site himself, descending a service ladder into the tunnel's stale darkness. His flashlight beam danced over decades of soot and graffiti, the third rail humming faintly. There, beneath a junction box streaked with rust, he found something no one else had noticed. A small, torn fragment of fabric caught in the grime of the concrete wall. Blue wool. Forensics later confirmed it matched Rachel's scarf. The discovery reignited the investigation, but it raised more questions than answers. How could a piece of her scarf end up inside a maintenance tunnel accessible only through locked gates? Why had no sensors triggered an intrusion alert? Navarro interviewed every MTA employee with access to that section of track, cross-referencing schedules and keycard entries. One name stood out: Donald R. Keane, a night maintenance foreman who'd clocked out at 12:07 a.m. on December 25th, 7 minutes after the train reached its terminal station. Keane had a spotless work record, a wife and 2 grown children, and lived in Queens. When Navarro visited him on December 29th, Keane appeared cooperative but nervous, his hands trembling as he poured coffee. He claimed he'd been home by 12:30, that he'd seen nothing unusual that night, but his eyes flickered when Navarro mentioned the voltage drop. A routine background check revealed nothing criminal, just disciplinary notes about unauthorized tunnel walks, the kind of shortcuts seasoned workers took to save time. Navarro noted his unease but lacked grounds for a warrant. Winter tightened its grip on the city. January arrived, cold and merciless, the kind of weather that makes concrete crack and people retreat indoors. The Mendez family returned to Yonkers under pressure from police who had no new leads. The flyers yellowed, the subway cameras rolled over to new tapes, and Rachel's name faded from the evening news. But Detective Navarro couldn't let it go. Every time he rode the 6 train, he found himself counting stations, watching reflections in the dark windows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Somewhere between Union Square and Bleecker, the city had swallowed a young woman whole, and he intended to find where. What he didn't know, not yet, was that buried deep in the MTA archives, in a box mislabeled Signal Anomalies 1999, lay a maintenance report that would, 2 decades later, reopen the case and expose a truth colder than the tunnels themselves. Detective Michael Navarro returned to the tunnels 2 days after the lab matched the blue fibers, moving like a man who had learned to hear the city's undervoice. The low metal consonants of switch points and the whispering vowels of air pushed through tile, his breath frosting in the beam of his flashlight as he traced the service walkway from Astor Place toward Bleecker with the stubborn patience of someone who refuses to let physics bully him into believing in the impossible. He crouched where the junction box sat high and rusted and ran his gloved fingers along the lip of the concrete seam until grit broke loose and skittered into the dark, cataloging in his head the distances that separated the living from the vanished, counting pole numbers and chalk marks, finding nothing that a report could stand on except a feeling that there was a slit in the map here, a paper cut in the diagram of the city through which a girl had slipped. And because instincts do not qualify as probable cause, he built his next steps the boring way, with paper and people, pulling rosters of every night foreman, signal maintainer, track inspector, and third-party contractor who'd set boot to ballast on December 24th or 25, interviewing them in break rooms that smelled of coffee and grease, letting the silence sit long enough to make the honest ones talk and the cautious ones look down, while on the surface the cold rigidified into a glassy January that brightened every morning and blackened every evening and pushed the undocumented and the unhoused farther into vestibules and stairwells, where they got swept away by city workers who could not see a single person, without seeing all the problems of the city at once. It was in one of those fluorescent-lit rooms beneath an administrative annex on 53rd Street that Navarro met a signal troubleshooter named Melinda Mel Ruiz who, unlike most, did not minimize the voltage dip, did not shrug and call it winter, but instead slid a finger down a photocopied grid and said she had been chasing ghost alarms in that stretch for months, little hiccups that wrote themselves into the log as transients and cleared before anyone could respond. And when Navarro asked her what she thought that meant, she said she had a theory nobody wanted to write down, that there was an undocumented tie-in sitting between the main and a spur that had been decommissioned in the 70s, a maintenance pocket never fully removed from the power tree because projects stop when budgets stop, which was how you got live copper feeding a dead limb of tunnel that existed on paper only as gray shading and in reality as a long, curved breath of darkness behind a wall that looked permanent. And when Navarro said walls in this city are never permanent, they are just older than the last man who asked the right question. Mel gave him a map and a look and told him to bring bolt cutters and a friend. He brought 2 friends, a transit bureau sergeant and an MTA safety officer who had no patience for police, but loved rules more than he disliked Navarro, and the 4 of them signed into a logbook that would later be inspected in court and clanged down a ladder that sweated with condensation despite the cold. their lamps scything the air as they passed the place where the fabric had snagged, and then continued another 50 yards to an alcove that presents in photographs as a nothing space, spalled concrete. An old steel gate, a wall-painted institutional green that had flaked to the color of dead limes, but in person smelled faintly, weirdly like household soap, the exact note Navarro's memory fingerprinted from his youth hanging laundry in winter kitchens. And right then Mel's lamp caught the telltale flatness of paint that dries over a different paint, and the safety officer said he didn't like this, and Mel said, "Open it," and Navarro said, "Photograph it first. Measure, log, touch nothing until touching is the only way forward," so they did. And the photographs show a padlock bright with recent use hanging from a hasp scarred with older rust, and the measurement notes set the gate 3 feet, 4 inches wide, and the report attests to the ring of metal on concrete when the cutters bit and the lock fell. And behind that gate there was not, as the diagrams promised, a poured wall, but a second gate, and beyond that a dead spur no longer dead, track gleaming faintly under dust that had been disturbed, and a pattern like a shoe had pivoted there and stuttered, and the narrow-bore service door to the right that looked like every other service door until you noticed there was no serial plate, no stamped code, just paint and a handle polished by hands that were not supposed to be here. Navarro did the thing that separates a detective from a tourist. He stepped back, closed his eyes, and composed the picture of a girl in a blue scarf moving through this space without knowing she was moving through it. And he asked himself what arrangement of fear and chance and human intention could have brought her out of a passenger car and into a ghost limb of track. And the answer that came first, because it was always the first answer the city offered, was a man with a key and a plan. When they opened the service door, photographed, measured, gloved, the odor shifted from metal and damp to something denser and older and threaded faintly with ammonia, and the beam fell on a corridor just wide enough for 2 shoulders to pass, leading to a cinder-block room painted the same dying green, empty except for a folding chair, a stack of old MTA maintenance manuals, a coil of nylon rope, and a milk crate full of little things, the sort of objects that have no story until somebody vanishes, and then every object is a story. Candy wrappers, a thermos lid, a plastic hair clip snapped in half, not blue but close, the color of winter sky when salt dust floats in the air. Evidence techs would later collect them all and charge the air with powder and light to find prints or DNA. But Navarro's certainty arrived not from lab potential, but from the scar on the wall at shoulder height where paint had pressed and flaked in the shape made when a head hits hard once and is never there again. And he touched the paint without touching it, the way a parent touches glass over a crib. He did not announce a discovery on the radio. He did not celebrate or speculate. He marked and logged and sealed, and then he climbed out into the cold and drove to Queens. Donald Keane opened the door of his narrow house in a robe, and the stale night compared itself to the stale room behind him and decided it was the same air. Keane said his wife was sleeping, and Navarro said this would be quick, and Keane said he had told them everything, and Navarro said he had one new thing and showed a photograph of the milk crate and the rope coil and the folding chair and the unnumbered door. Watched Keane's eyes stage a small war between outrage and recognition, and when the outrage charged first, Keane raised his hands and said he had never seen that room. What room? There are 1,000 rooms down there, and Navarro watched the recognition regroup, while he let silence be the 5th man in the squad. And then he said Rachel's name and asked when Keane had last walked the spur between Astor and Bleecker, and Keane said never, and Navarro said, softly, that the city writes everything down and electricity remembers more than men do. And then Keane made the mistake men make when they are tired and scared. He filled a silence with a detail nobody had invited. He said the tie-in wasn't safe, not for passengers. And Navarro stopped breathing for 1 heartbeat, and then he breathed again and asked him to come downtown. The interview lasted 6 hours and produced nothing admissible. Just a bad feeling and a dozen little tells, palms sweating, chronology fraying, a certain sadness when Keane spoke of his children that suggested he knew what kind of winter he stood in. And when they let him go at dawn with a shadow of a tail, the shadow lost him for 2 miles and found him again near a florist where he did not buy anything, just stood outside the window as if the thought of flowers exhausted him. In late January, the case lurched and stumbled, and found new footing not because of a confession, but because of a box, not the signal anomalies box Navarro wouldn't know about for 20 years, but another misfiled soldier in the paper army, a cardboard cube that had been living on a shelf, under a mislabel since 1995 labeled ventilation, and inside it, folded copies of a project that had died the way civic things in this city die, a plan to close and concrete seal a series of non-revenue spurs to save maintenance costs, complete. With photographs, and in one photograph a young maintenance apprentice in a hard hat stood grinning with a crescent wrench in his hand, while behind him a certain corridor, unplated door, dying green paint, same bolt pattern around the hinge, yawned, open like a promise. The apprentice's name, typed in a caption that had bled at the edges, was Donald R. Keane. It should have been enough for a warrant. It was not. The assistant district attorney assigned to Navarro, a careful woman named Rachel Wolfe who disliked the coincidence of names, said you cannot kick down a man's life with a 20-year-old. Smile. And Navarro said, then let's find new copper. And Mel Ruiz said there will be fingerprints where there should be none, and oils where no one is supposed to have been for decades. And the safety officer said not if your man wore gloves. And Navarro said people only wear gloves until they forget and touch their face. The second tunnel search paid out small treasure. A partial palm print on the back of the unplated door at a height that suggested someone pushing it open with their hand while holding something else, a thin smear of what the crime lab called proteinaceous material along the hinge, and in the milk crate, wedged under paper, a single MetroCard sleeve from a midtown hotel gift shop with a handwritten initial E in black ink that a boyfriend named Eli recognized as his, said he had written it on Rachel's card when he surprised her with a monthly in November because she kept losing the loose cards, a detail that would later pinch his lungs when he realized how the sleeve traveled. None of it put a body in a room or a girl in a tunnel, and January bent toward February with the slow ache of a city that breaks and fixes itself hourly, and the flyers came down except in the places where flyers never come down, and the Mendez went home every night to a table laid for three with a plate that cooled untouched until the clock moved it into the category of ritual, and Navarro, who did not believe in ghosts, began to measure his days by the length of time he could go without, seeing that folded scarf in his mind, trying not to lean on the image like a crutch and failing. In March, a clerk in records who had taken a liking to Navarro called to say she had found something in transit procurement, purchase orders for padlocks keyed to a master that had not been in service since the 70s, an order placed through a third-party vendor in late 1998 and signed for by a supervisor whose signature weaved into illegibility, but whose initials matched a name Navarro had seen a dozen times on time cards and tunnel logs in late 1999. D.K. And while a signature is not a person, a pattern is a portrait, and Navarro colored in another inch. He went back to Queens with the paper portrait in his pocket and found Keane in his yard stacking bags of salt as if spring were never coming. Asked him whether he believed in closures, not criminal, structural. Told him he had photographs. Told him electricity remembers. And Keane's eyes fogged with the despair of a man who knows winter will be his last season of free air. And he said that the city has a way of breaking the people who keep it running, and that you could disappear in those tunnels without even meaning to. And Navarro said Rachel did not mean to. And Keane said a sentence that fell out of him like an old bolt, stripped and useless. He said she was kind, and Navarro held that word like a shard because you don't say kind about a stranger you never met. And he asked where the rest of her was, and Keane closed his mouth as if the air had hardened around it. The district attorney would not authorize an arrest without a body or a confession. The press would not care without an anniversary or an angle. The city would not stop moving to honor a grief that held no spectacle. And still Navarro went down, into the tunnels, another pilgrim in a cathedral of machines, and stood in the green room and waited for the room to tell him what happened, and it said nothing because rooms do not talk, people do, and the person who could talk would not. The case slid toward cold. Years passed in calendar pages and station announcements. The Roosevelt Hotel changed bellhops, and then would one day close. Eli finished school late, left the city for a while, came back with a smaller voice. Jessica moved to the West Coast, and mailed a box of Rachel's books to Yonkers because she could not bear to see them and could not bear to sell them, so she did the third thing people do, which is to transfer suffering by mail. Navarro made detective second grade and then, first and collected a drawer of cases that resolved and one that did not, and in another department in another borough, A clerk mislabeled a box of signal reports, wrote the wrong year on a sticker, and no one thought about that error until a Friday in 2019 when a state task force tackling backlogs pried open old lids like coffins and found an anomaly report stamped December 24, 1999, 2354, unauthorized switch throw recorded by Relay 6A17 in the Astor to Bleecker Spur, cleared after 30 seconds, resolved code 03, human intervention suspected. Note appended in a hand that Mel recognized immediately when Navarro, older now, opened the scan on a screen that lit his face the way the tunnels had once lit his lamp. The note. Reading check pocket lock. Lock appears new. Who issued key? Signed D. Keane. Detective Navarro read the note twice, each word pulling a thread that reached backward through 20 winters to the night a girl had folded herself out of the world, and he understood in the bone way of old policemen that what had once been a suspicion was now a closed circuit. The power fluctuation, the lock, the unnumbered door, all registered under the hand of the man who had insisted for years that he saw nothing. He called Mel Ruiz, who had stayed with the Transit Bureau long after most colleagues had fled to desk jobs or early retirements, and she met him the next morning in the yard on 207th Street where snow from the previous week lay in gray ridges against the chain-link fence. They signed out the old plans, the vault keys, the personal gas meters, and went back into the earth. The tunnels smelled the same, dust, ozone, the slow rot of forgotten wood, but something in Navarro's step had changed. He was no longer listening for a ghost, but following the contour of a confession that had been hiding in paperwork. At the spur, the green room looked smaller, crushed inward by the weight of 2 decades. The folding chair and the crate were long gone, sealed in evidence boxes now brittle with age. But the wall bore new graffiti, names, dates, a crude heart. Navarro set his light on the hinge line where the paint had flaked before, slid his fingers along the seam, and found fresh scratches. The safety seals they had placed back in 2000 were cut. Someone had been here recently. He logged the violation, called the new district captain, and requested a forensic team, but the weekend delay forced him to wait. Navarro did not wait well. He sat on the platform stairs until dawn, notebook open, drawing the tunnel as if by sketching he could make it confess. At sunrise, he walked to a diner on Houston, ordered black coffee, and dialed the number he had promised himself never to use again. It rang 9 times before a voice answered, hoarse with age and sleeplessness. Donald Keane. Navarro said only that they needed to talk. There was a pause, then a quiet sigh that sounded like surrender. They met that night at a laundromat in Queens, the one Keane had managed after retiring from transit. Rows of machines turned in metallic rhythm, reflecting blue light from a wall-mounted TV showing weather updates about an approaching cold front. Keane looked smaller, his face carved into narrow planes, hands trembling from something deeper than cold. Navarro slid the photocopy of the anomaly report across the folding table between them. Keane stared at it, blinked, and whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." The conversation that followed never entered an official transcript. It lived instead in the gray zone between statement and story. Keane said the spur had been his responsibility in the late 90s, that the city's new safety directives required every unused tunnel to be checked monthly for vagrants, fire hazards, or trespassers. Most inspectors ignored the rule. Keane didn't. He treated the forgotten lines like sick patients, documenting voltage levels, scraping rust, tightening locks no one else cared about. On Christmas Eve 1999, during the storm, he had gone below to reset a tripped breaker near Astor. He insisted he had seen light where there should have been none, a flicker like a lantern. Thinking it was a drifter, he approached the green door and heard movement, shuffling, a woman's voice calling faintly for help. He unlocked the gate, stepped inside, and saw a young woman stumbling in the dark, hair plastered by melting snow, scarf half undone. She looked terrified. Said something about missing a train. He reached to steady her, and she slipped, hitting her head on the wall. His words broke there. He claimed he tried to revive her, that he panicked when she didn't breathe, that the power surge was him accidentally brushing a live contact as he moved her. Fear, he said, not malice, had guided everything that followed. He dragged her body deeper into the spur, laid her on a maintenance. platform and sealed the door. "I told myself someone would find her," he said. "But no one ever came." Navarro listened without interrupting. Years of interrogations had taught him that guilt distorts memory, that confession is not truth but negotiation with conscience. Yet Keane's trembling specificity, the color of the gloves he'd worn, the way her scarf slipped from his hand and landed folded, matched too many physical details to dismiss. Navarro asked why he hadn't come forward. Keane looked past him toward the dryers spinning with other people's clothes and said, "Because the city forgets fast. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would forget her too." When Navarro asked where she was, Keane said, "Still there." The next day, search teams reopened the spur. Beneath a layer of dust and rubble behind a low retaining wall, they found remnants: scraps of cloth, a student ID card fused to plastic, bone fragments too small to identify by sight. Forensics later confirmed mitochondrial DNA matching Carmen Mendez. The news broke on a bitter February morning. Headlines describing subway skeleton found after 20 years. Cameras crowded the platform. Reporters invoked Christmas ghosts and city indifference. Navarro watched from behind the barricade, snow melting on his coat, feeling no triumph, only the gravity of completion. Keane was arrested without resistance. During booking, he repeated the same sentence. It wasn't supposed to happen. In court, the prosecution built the timeline from his own maintenance logs, the voltage drop, the unauthorized lock order. They described a man who used his keys to lead a frightened passenger into an off-limits area, whose intent shifted from rescue to control, then to concealment. The defense argued accidental death, exhaustion, fear. After a short trial, he was convicted of manslaughter and unlawful concealment. He died in prison in 2008, years before the anomaly report resurfaced, meaning that when the official record finally acknowledged his confession, he was already part of the city's dust. For Navarro, retirement arrived like an afterthought. He kept the scarf, now sealed in an evidence bag, in his desk drawer until the day he left the precinct. Sometimes he took it out during winter storms, the way some men hold medals or photographs. Mel Ruiz rose to supervisor and published a paper on forgotten infrastructure. The Mendez family chose not to attend the sentencing, saying closure was an illusion. In 2019, when the task force re-examined the case for a documentary, Navarro agreed to one interview. He spoke slowly, eyes unfocused, describing the tunnels as places that remember better than people. When the interviewer asked what haunted him most, he said it wasn't the crime, but the idea that for 20 years, thousands of passengers had ridden over that spur, hearing nothing, feeling nothing, while beneath them a secret waited in perfect silence. The camera kept rolling after the official questions ended. Navarro mentioned an unsent letter he'd once written to Carmen Mendez, explaining that he had seen the photo of Rachel smiling in front of the university library and that he wanted to believe she had not been afraid at the end. He never mailed it. The producers cut that part, saying it was too quiet for television. After the documentary aired, viewers flooded forums with theories that Keane had lied, that someone else had been there, that the city had covered up other disappearances. The noise rose and faded, as all noise does. The station was renovated. The spur was finally sealed with concrete poured in layers until no trace of the door remained. Each December, the new metal panels sweat with condensation that freezes into delicate crystal patterns. And conductors say that on certain cold nights when the train breaks before Bleecker, the lights flicker just once. The same 30-second pulse recorded in 1999. Navarro lives now in Staten Island, walks the pier at dawn, and still takes the subway when he goes into Manhattan. He rides the 6 deliberately, standing near the car where Rachel vanished, watching the reflection of passengers in the window glass, students, nurses, men with tool belts, and listens for the faint electric hum that connects every car, every story, every ghost of the city that never truly forgets. The city never truly gives back what it takes. It only returns fragments, softened by time, disguised as artifacts of coincidence. The concrete closes, the lights are replaced, the names fade from reports, and yet something always remains in the steel and static of its bones. 20 years after that Christmas Eve, after the headlines had dissolved into archived dust and the evidence boxes stacked against walls that no one looked at anymore, the tunnels beneath Manhattan began to whisper again. The first sign was nothing extraordinary, just a voltage fluctuation, 41 seconds long, registered by the Transit Bureau's new digital system in the same sector between Astor Place and Bleecker, where Rachel Mendez had vanished. It was December 24th, 2019, the anniversary of the disappearance, and the technician who logged it, a recent hire named Jordan Lee, noticed the timestamp and smiled uneasily. "Same night, same time," he joked to his supervisor, but the supervisor didn't laugh. A maintenance crew was dispatched to inspect the circuit, but the tracks were clean, no exposed cables, no shorted junctions, no reason for a spike. The file was closed again, as it always was. 2 months later, a subway conductor reported a strange incident on the downtown 6 train. Around midnight, just before entering the Bleecker Tunnel, he said he heard a voice over the internal communication line, female, faint, whispering the word help 3 times. Thinking it was a passenger triggering the emergency intercom, he stopped at the next platform and walked the cars. Every seat was empty. The system logs confirmed no activation, no malfunction. He filed the report out of obligation, then went home and tried not to dream. When the story reached retired Detective Michael Navarro, now 68, he dismissed it at first. The city had stories for everything: the haunted tunnel, the faceless commuter, the missing train. But that night, lying in his narrow Staten Island apartment, he couldn't sleep. The wind from the harbor carried the same frozen hiss he remembered from that first descent in 1999. By dawn, he had packed a small notebook, an old MTA access badge Mel Ruiz had reactivated for him as a favor, and a flashlight. He told himself he was just going to look. Union Square at 7 a.m. was a mosaic of commuters, phones glowing like bioluminescent fish. The new LED panels and bright white tiles made the station feel sterile, almost antiseptic, but beneath the clean renovation, Navarro still felt the ghost architecture of the old tunnels pressing through. He walked the platform edges, timing train arrivals, tracing the pattern of passengers as they moved between cars. On the far end, near a service gate disguised as an electrical closet, he found something that shouldn't have been there: a thin line of frost clinging to the hinge seam despite the warmth of the platform. He pressed his hand against the metal. It was cold, not the kind of cold from temperature, but the kind that comes from air that shouldn't exist behind sealed steel. He felt the faintest draft. The spur had been filled with concrete in 2009. He had watched them pour it himself. But as he leaned closer, the air hummed, a vibration barely audible but real enough that his teeth ached. He stepped back, wrote nothing, and took the uptown train home. For days he tried to rationalize it: ventilation, bad memory, imagination. But he began dreaming of trains again. Empty cars sliding through endless dark, lights flickering to reveal the outline of a girl standing at the far door, her blue scarf unfurling like smoke. He would wake drenched in cold sweat, the shape of her face already dissolving. On January 4th, 2020, Navarro visited Mel Ruiz at her small office overlooking the East River. She had retired from fieldwork but still consulted for the Transit Authority on infrastructure audits. When he told her about the frost, she laughed gently, said, "You're seeing ghosts again, Mike." But when he mentioned the humming, her expression changed. She opened her computer and pulled up the electrical grid logs. The voltage drop from Christmas Eve had already been archived. But she found something else: a recurring low-frequency resonance recorded by a vibration sensor in the decommissioned spur's vicinity, repeating every year between December 23 and 25, always within minutes of 11:55 p.m. "It's mechanical," she said, "like metal expanding under heat." Yet she couldn't explain why it aligned so precisely with the time of Rachel's disappearance. That night, Navarro returned to Union Square. He carried a small recorder and stood near the gate for hours. Commuters came and went, trains screamed inside, and somewhere between the noise he thought he heard a second rhythm, faint, steady, like footsteps echoing behind a wall. He pressed the recorder close and the sound stopped. Then a whisper, almost playful, "Are you still looking?" He froze, scanning the crowd. No one was near him. He turned off the recorder and walked away, but he knew he would come back. By mid-January, the story had leaked. A transit blogger wrote an article titled "The Ghost Line of the 6 Train," featuring excerpts from old case files and Navarro's name. Within days, conspiracy forums resurrected the mystery, dissecting every detail of Rachel's case. They claimed the spur was never filled, that Keane had been a scapegoat, that the MTA had covered up an entire string of disappearances. Navarro ignored it until he saw a video posted by an urban explorer who had broken into a maintenance shaft near Astor Place. The footage was shaky, grainy, but for a few seconds the camera captured what looked like a newly welded section of wall. The explorer tapped it with a wrench and a hollow echo answered. The caption read, "You can still hear the train inside." Navarro showed the video to Mel. She insisted it was fake, but he could see the worry beneath her denial. Against her better judgment, she arranged for him to accompany a maintenance inspection crew scheduled for February. 2. They descended at dawn through a side access, hatch sealed since 2010. The air was colder than surface temperature, a dry, electric chill that raised gooseflesh under Navarro's coat. As their headlamps swept across the concrete, he noticed hairline cracks spiderwebbing the filled section, thin but fresh. One of the workers tapped the wall. It vibrated slightly. "There's air behind this," he said. Navarro knelt, pressing his ear to the surface. A sound, faint but undeniable, pulsed beyond the concrete, the rhythmic click of train wheels on track, coming from nowhere. The crew chief, pale, ordered everyone out. Navarro stayed until Mel pulled him by the arm. Later that day, she submitted an official report citing seismic feedback from nearby construction. But she handed Navarro a separate note in private. "If you go back, go alone." He did. February 10th, 2020, midnight, snow again. The city above slept under a thin white blanket, but underground, the air was alive with static. Navarro entered through the service hatch with only his flashlight and recorder. The cracks in the wall had widened, flakes of concrete littering the ground like gray snow. He traced one with his finger and felt warm air leaking through. A mechanical groan echoed deep and slow, as though something massive shifted behind the barrier. He turned on the recorder and whispered, "Rachel, if you're here, I'm listening." The hum rose, steadying into a tone, not random but structured. 3 pulses, pause, 3 more, like a heartbeat. Then a voice soft and low filled the tunnel. It wasn't words at first, just breath shaped by memory. Then he didn't mean to. Navarro stumbled back, heart pounding. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. He saw frost blooming across the concrete like breath crystallizing on glass, forming letters that evaporated as fast as they appeared. He caught only fragments. Wrong door. Light. Fall. Sorry, he recorded until the battery died. When he replayed it later, all he heard was the hum of the tracks. He returned home before dawn, shaking. For the first time in decades, he considered that the story might not be finished, not just in a legal sense, but in something larger, colder. He mailed the recorder to Mel with no note. A week later, she called him in tears. "Mike, I played it through spectrum analysis," she said. "There's a voice under the static. Female. It says your name." Navarro never shared the file publicly. He told himself it was interference, an artifact of low signal, but he couldn't explain why it repeated 3 times, each whisper clearer than the last. "Michael, stop looking." In the months that followed, the pandemic swept through the city and the tunnels emptied for the first time in living memory. With no passengers to drown the silence, maintenance crews began reporting strange occurrences. Trains that braked without command near Bleecker, motion sensors triggering in sealed corridors, and once, a thermal camera capturing a brief silhouette in a space that no longer existed. When Navarro read those reports, he didn't smile. He knew cities remember. They store every act, every sound, every breath. You can pour concrete over truth, but it seeps through like groundwater. On Christmas Eve 2020, Navarro took the 6 train one last time. The car was nearly empty. Snowflakes clung to the window like static ghosts. As the train approached Union Square, the lights dimmed, just for an instant, and in the reflection he saw a girl sitting across from him. A navy pea coat, dark hair, blue scarf folded in her lap. She smiled faintly, as if recognizing him, then vanished as the lights returned. He stayed seated until the last stop, the car empty, the air cold and still. On the seat beside him lay a MetroCard, its surface cracked with age. The name handwritten in faded black ink. E. The MetroCard sat in his hand like a relic unearthed from a tomb, its plastic bent. The black magnetic strip scuffed white in places where fingers had held it long ago. Navarro turned it over under the harsh fluorescent light of the empty car, watching the ink shimmer faintly, the single letter, E, ghosting in the corner of the card like something trying to stay in the world. He felt his heartbeat slow, one thud at a time, the way it used to do when the facts of a case began to tilt toward the uncanny. The conductor announced the final station, and the doors side open onto a platform that smelled of cold metal and stale rain. He pocketed the card and stepped out, waiting for the doors to close. The train lingered longer than it should have, as if waiting for him to say something, and then pulled away with the hollow moan of wheels against steel echoing down the tunnel until silence was all that remained. He rode the escalator up into the snow-thick night, where the streets lay abandoned, windows lit only by the pale televisions of insomniacs. The city had grown older around him. New skyscrapers stood where warehouses had been, glass and light where there once was brick and dark, but it still breathed the same way. Hollow, mechanical, ancient. Navarro walked until the street lamps gave way to darkness, and by the time he reached his apartment, dawn was only an hour away. He sat at the kitchen table, the MetroCard beside the cold coffee, staring at it like it might offer an explanation if he simply refused to blink. By morning, the news had already changed again. Weather, politics, infection counts. No one would care about a retired detective holding an old transit card with a ghost's initial. But one person did, Mel Ruiz. She called at noon, her voice low and uneven. "Mike, there's something you should see," she said. I ran the spectral data again. The voice, it's not just saying your name anymore. She emailed him an audio file. Navarro plugged in his headphones, pressed play. Static first, then the hum he remembered. The same mechanical heart that pulsed beneath the tracks. Then words, unmistakable, layered like two voices speaking at once. He's not gone. He felt the chill rise through him like a tide. Who? He asked aloud, though he knew the answer. He spent the next days chasing paperwork. Keane's death certificate, the autopsy report from 2008, the transfer logs from Rikers. Everything was in order, yet the details were too neat. The attending physician had signed off late, the witness line blank. The prison logs showed a transport error, one van rerouted due to snow, arrival time unrecorded. It meant nothing officially, but to a man like Navarro, whose life had been built on the microscopic fractures in the surface of stories, it meant everything. He drove to the cemetery listed in the file, Maple Grove, Queens. The groundskeeper was young, distracted, wearing earbuds. When Navarro gave him the name Donald R. Keane, the man scrolled through a digital register and frowned. "He's not here," he said. "Lot number exists, but no burial record. Maybe a transfer?" Navarro stood over the empty plot, the snow undisturbed, no headstone, just a marker stake with the number 317. Wind howled through the pines, carrying the metallic smell of distant trains. Somewhere beneath, a city of tunnels murmured its secrets. He drove home in silence. That night he dreamed of the spur again, the green walls, the smell of soap and rust, and a sound like footsteps pacing just beyond sight. He woke with frost on his window despite the heater running full. The clock read 3:17 a.m. The next day he met Mel at her office. She looked pale, her desk covered in blueprints and digital scans. "Mike, this will sound insane," she said, "but the concrete fill from the spur, there's no structural record for it. The city archives listed as completed in 2009, but there's no supplier invoice, no engineering signature, no delivery logs. It's like it was never poured." She opened a recent sonar scan she'd pulled from the 2018 renovation data. The image showed layers of density, tile, air, concrete, but in the section labeled spur, the reading was hollow. Empty space. Navarro stared at it. "You're saying the tunnel's still there?" "I'm saying something's still there." They argued about jurisdiction, about safety, about the ghosts that follow men who refuse to quit. But by the end of the night, they had a plan. On December 24th, 2021, 22 years to the night, Navarro and Mel would return to Union Square with ground-penetrating sensors and a portable camera. "We can't publish it," she said, "but we'll know." The station that evening felt wrong from the start. The air was too still, the temperature several degrees colder than the platform above. Commuters hurried past without looking at them. Navarro carried the old recorder. Mel carried the tablet feeding from the sensors. The gate where the frost had appeared months earlier was unmarked now, freshly painted. But when Mel powered the scanner, the tablet flashed red, motion detected behind the wall, slow, rhythmic, like breathing. "There's heat back there," she whispered. Navarro pressed his ear to the metal. A sound answered, faint but deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. They stared at each other. Then the lights flickered once, twice, the station plunging briefly into darkness. When they came back on, the gate stood slightly ajar. "Mike," Mel began, but he was already moving, prying the door open with a crowbar. Beyond it, a narrow corridor stretched into blackness. He turned on his flashlight. The green paint was gone, replaced by raw concrete streaked with moisture, but the air smelled the same, soap and rust. They stepped inside, the sound of the station fading until only the hum of unseen machinery filled the silence. After 20 paces, the corridor opened into a chamber Navarro recognized instantly, the room where the chair had stood. Only now there was a table in its place, and on it a single object, the blue scarf, folded neatly. Mel whispered, "This isn't possible." Navarro reached out, touched the fabric. It was warm. From the far end of the room, a shape moved, slow, deliberate, human. A man stepped into the light, his face half-shadowed. The years had changed him, thinner, hollower, hair gone to white. But the eyes were unmistakable. "Keane," Navarro breathed. The man smiled faintly. "You never stopped looking." Navarro raised his flashlight, the beam trembling. "You died in prison." "I was buried in the wrong place," Keane said softly. "The city wanted to forget, but I never left." He stepped closer, and Navarro saw the dirt under his fingernails, the grime of tunnels ground into his skin. "She's still here, you know." "Always was. You sealed her in." Mel backed toward the door, whispering, "Mike, we need to go." But Navarro couldn't move. The air thickened, the hum rising into a low resonance that shook the floor. Keane turned, gesturing toward the wall behind the table. "It's all connected. Power, air, memory. She never left the line. She became it." Then the lights cut out. Total darkness. Mel screamed his name. The recorder fell from Navarro's hand, clattering against concrete. He reached for her but touched only cold air. When the lights flickered back, the room was empty. No Keane, no Mel, no scarf. Only the open door behind him and the faint echo of a train receding into the dark. He stumbled out into the corridor, heart hammering, calling her name. The echo answered once, then silence. When he reached the platform, commuters were boarding as if nothing had happened. The gate behind him was closed, sealed again, no sign of hinges or seams. He turned to a nearby officer, tried to speak, but the words stuck. In his palm, warm against his skin, lay the MetroCard. The letter E had faded entirely. That night, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the card under lamplight. The surface had changed. Beneath the scratches, faint new lines had appeared like pressure impressions from handwriting. He tilted it until the light caught the grooves and could just make out 4 letters pressed into the plastic from inside. Mel. He didn't sleep. At dawn, he took the ferry across the river, the city glowing pale behind him. The train system continued as if untouched. Commuters, schedules, endless motion. The news would later report an electrical malfunction in the Union Square sector that caused minor service delays. No mention of missing inspectors, no mention of ghosts. But Navarro knew better. He understood now that the tunnels were never built to carry only trains. They carried memory, guilt, echoes of every unfinished story. He placed the MetroCard on the ferry railing, watching the wind lift it, and whispered, "Let her rest." The card slipped from his fingers, spinning into the dark water below. For a moment, he saw its reflection catch the first light of morning, a shimmer of blue, like the ghost of a scarf fluttering beneath the waves. For 3 days after the incident, Navarro didn't speak. He couldn't explain where Mel had gone without sounding insane, couldn't describe what he'd seen in the tunnel without sounding guilty. He told the responding officers that she'd walked ahead of him into the corridor and hadn't come back. They searched the spur with drones, sensors, even heat scanners, but all they found was solid concrete. The official report concluded, spatial miscommunication due to low visibility and psychological distress. Mel Ruiz, 49, consultant to the Transit Authority, was listed as missing under uncertain circumstances. Navarro read the report twice and laughed until his throat burned. Then he tore it in half and left it on his kitchen table. The city didn't stop for missing people. By January 2022, the case had faded to a paragraph on page 6 of the Post. The tunnels remained sealed, the spur reclassified as non-existent infrastructure. Navarro received no more calls from the department, no visits, no warnings. He'd become, once again, a ghost among the living, a man people whispered about but never approached. He lived in silence, surviving on coffee and the dull rhythm of his own breathing, waiting for the sound of trains he could no longer bring himself to ride. Then, in February, the first package arrived. No return address, just a plain manila envelope, his name printed neatly in block letters. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in blue fabric, a scrap torn cleanly along one edge, the weave unmistakable. Navarro plugged it into his laptop with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The drive contained one file labeled Subway Winter 1999.mover. He pressed play. The footage was old but clear, analog transferred to digital. Timestamp 12-24, 1999, 23:51:07. The camera was handheld, its perspective jerking as it followed a young woman descending the Union Square staircase. She wore a navy coat, dark jeans, a messenger bag, and a blue scarf. Rachel Mendez. The footage showed her scanning her MetroCard, entering the turnstile, walking toward the platform. Then, in the corner of the frame, a man appeared. Late 50s, heavy-set, uniform jacket unbuttoned, ID badge blurred. Donald Keane. The camera zoomed slightly as Rachel approached him, saying something inaudible over the rumble of an arriving train. Keane gestured toward the maintenance corridor, smiled, and she hesitated. The camera's focus shifted. Rachel turned, glanced directly toward the lens, and for an instant her expression froze, as if realizing she was being filmed. Then she followed Keane through the door. The footage ended in static. Navarro replayed it 5 times, searching for clues in every frame. The perspective suggested someone standing across the platform, filming covertly. A bystander or an accomplice. He exported stills, enhanced shadows, checked the timestamp. The metadata confirmed authenticity, but the footage had never been logged in evidence. Someone had kept it hidden for 23 years. He called the only person he still trusted, Detective Carla Moreno, a former colleague who'd worked under him in the mid-2000s. She agreed to meet at a diner in Brooklyn, her badge clipped to her belt, hair streaked with gray. When Navarro showed her the video, she didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she said, "Where did you get this?" "It came in the mail," he said. "Then you need to get out of the city." She explained that during Mel's consultancy, she'd been reviewing internal audits for the Transit Bureau's security division. Mel had discovered discrepancies in the CCTV archives, weeks of footage missing from December 1999, along with camera inventories that didn't match installation records. "She thought someone inside Transit filmed that night," Moreno said. "An employee, not a random creep. Someone with access?" Navarro's throat went dry. "Keane?" Moreno shook her head. "No, someone higher. Someone who made sure the official story ended with him." She slid a file across the table, a photocopy of an internal memo from January 2000. It referenced experimental surveillance, program deep-line visual monitoring, authorized by Director H. Greaves. They were testing a new low-light system that month, unofficially. No warrants, no disclosure. It was shut down after the disappearance because of public backlash, but Greaves kept the data. The name was familiar. Navarro remembered Greaves from briefings, an engineer turned bureaucrat with an uncanny ability to make evidence vanish. He'd retired in 2007, bought property upstate, and disappeared from public life. Navarro looked at the still frame of Rachel's face frozen mid-step. If the video had come from that program, Greaves, or someone close to him, had sent it. That night he drove north. Snow fell in thick sheets, coating the highway in silver dust. Greaves's address led to a cabin near Cold Spring, half buried in ice, windows boarded. Navarro knocked 3 times before the door opened. Greaves stood in the threshold, older but unmistakable, his eyes bright with the fever of men who've seen too much. "I wondered how long it would take you," he said. Inside, the air smelled of dust and burnt circuits. Computers lined the walls, old monitors flickering with static. On one screen, a live feed showed a dark tunnel. "It never stopped recording," Greaves said. "The cameras down there, they were wired into the maintenance power grid. They see what the city won't." Navarro stared at the feed. It was black at first, then a light flickered, faint, rhythmic. "What is that?" "Heartbeat," Greaves murmured. "Or something pretending to be." He handed Navarro another flash drive. "Every year on Christmas Eve, same time. Movement near the spur. Sometimes a figure, sometimes 2. It's been repeating since 1999. Why send me the first video? Because you're the only one who believes in ghosts." Before Navarro could answer, the monitors flared white. The feed filled with static, then with the image of a corridor. A woman stood at its end, half in shadow, the scarf bright against the dark. She turned slowly, looking straight into the camera. Her face flickered between youth and age, alive and dead, Rachel and Mel. Then the image froze. The sound that followed was a train braking, long, metallic, endless. Greaves killed the power. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock. "It wants witnesses," he said softly. "Every 20 years it calls them back." "That's why you're here." Navarro left without another word, the flash drive heavy in his pocket. Back in the city, he played the new file. The footage showed the tunnel from a fixed angle, time-stamped 12/24/2019, 23:55:04. A shadow crossed the frame, tall, masculine, moving with deliberate steps. Then faintly a woman's voice, "Mike?" The shadow turned toward the sound, and for a split second the light caught the face. It wasn't Keane, it was him. Navarro paused the video, staring at his own reflection in the glass. A younger version, same coat, same expression of grim determination. The date was 3 years before he'd gone down there with Mel. "That's impossible," he whispered. He replayed it again, watching the figure move into the dark until only the hum remained. For the next week, he tried to dismiss it as manipulation, deepfake, madness. But each night the city sent reminders, lights flickering as trains passed, power surges at the same minute, whispers of help caught on radio scanners. On December 23, 2022, he received a final message, a text from an unknown number containing only coordinates beneath Union Square and one sentence: "The line never ends." He went. The station was nearly empty, snow falling outside in soft spirals. He carried no camera this time, no recorder, just the flashlight and the memory of everyone the city had swallowed. At 11:55 p.m., the lights dimmed as if the subway itself were holding its breath. The gate was open again, the corridor waiting. He stepped inside, following the hum. The air thickened, the temperature dropping. Somewhere ahead, the tunnel curved, and he saw them, shapes flickering like film reels overexposed, Rachel in her navy coat, Mel holding the tablet, Keane with his keyring, all moving in silent repetition of the same motion, like actors trapped in a loop that refused to end. Navarro walked forward until the air itself vibrated, a pressure building in his ears. The figures turned toward him in unison. Rachel's lips moved first. "Someone has to stay." Mel's voice followed, echoing hers. "Someone always does." He felt the walls closing, the hum folding into a single pure tone. The flashlight died. For a heartbeat, he was blind, floating in darkness. Then the floor vanished beneath his feet. When the maintenance crew reopened the sector in 2023 after a routine inspection, they found a set of footprints leading to the sealed gate, size 10. Standard-issue police boots, ending abruptly at the door. The access log showed the gate had opened at 11:55 p.m. and closed at 11:57. No one had been scheduled for entry. Navarro's apartment remained untouched, his keys on the counter, his coat missing. The Transit Bureau issued a short statement. "We mourn the loss of Detective Michael Navarro, whose decades of service embody the spirit of this city." No one mentioned the faint blue scarf tied to the railing above the tracks, fluttering in the air current as the first morning train pulled through Union Square.